Hello, welcome. I'm JD Adler. This is the first episode of my new video blog, I guess is what it's called, the title of which is Old Saul. In Old Saul, I will be doing semi-regular readings and discussions on old tales. We're going to be starting with this rather large collection of Brothers Grimm fairy tales as translated by Jack Zeitz. Zeitz, in the beginning, he does a nice biography, rather intensive one, on the Brothers Grimm, their family and such. If you're interested, I'm not going to go into all those sort of details here. We're focused on the stories themselves here, but if you're interested, he does a nice biography on them, just a few pages, and he also talks about his translation method. He says that claims that this is the most, when this is published in '85, that it is the most comprehensive collection of the Grimm's work, and that it is the truest translation because he tries to, even when he's using modern language for '85, he is trying to retain integrity of the idioms and the character of the language from the Germanic in the 19th century when they were first written. I can leave it up to the audience to decide for themselves how well he's accomplished that. But as I'm going through each of these stories, I think you're going to find that the original version of these stories, which these are, that's what we're hearing here, are quite a bit different than the Disneyfied versions of them that we're familiar with. A good example, I'm just going to go in order through these stories. The first one is you may sound familiar to the Princess and the Frog story that you're familiar with, but it is, as you'll quickly discover, quite a bit different in this older, more original version. So, let's just get right into it. This first story, the title was The Frog King, or Iron Heinrich. Here we go. In olden times, when wishing still held, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful. They're all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, which had seen so many things, was always filled with amazement each time it cast its rays upon her face. Now, there was a great dark forest near the king's castle, which, let's be honest, there's always a dark forest near the king's castle. But there was a great dark forest near the king's castle, and in this forest, beneath an old linden tree, was a well. Whenever the days were very hot, the king's daughter would go into this forest, sit down by the edge of the cool well. If she became bored, she would take her golden ball, throw it into the air, and catch it. More than anything else, she loved playing with this ball. Okay, we're a paragraph in, but I'm sorry, I got to interrupt to point out that the king's daughter is a moron. More than anything else in the world, she loved playing with this ball. That's her favorite thing in the whole. She's got the entire castle. She's got the fortunes of a kingdom. More than anything else. Anyway, sorry. So the Brothers Grimm got this girl. She loves playing with a ball. One day, it so happened that the ball did not fall back into the princess's little hand as she reached out to catch it. Instead, it bounced right by her and rolled straight into the water. The princess followed it with her eyes, but the ball disappeared, and the well was deep, so very deep that she could not see the bottom. She began to cry, and she cried louder and louder, for there was nothing that could comfort her. As she sat there grieving over her loss, a voice calls out to her, "What's the matter, princess? Your tears could move even a stone to pity." She looked around to see where the voice was coming from and saw a frog sticking his thick, ugly head out of the water. That is really racist against frogs. Why? What did the frogs do? Anyway, sticking his thick, ugly head out of the water. "Oh, it's you, you old water splasher." "You old water splasher," she said. "I'm crying because my golden ball has fallen into the well." "Be quiet and stop crying," the frog responded. "I'm sure I can help you. But what will you give me if I fetch your plaything?" "Whatever you like, dear frog," she said. "My clothes, my pearls and jewels, even the golden crown I'm wearing upon my head." She wore her crown to the well. Jeez. Talk about privilege. Anyway, I don't want your clothes, your pearls and jewels, or your golden crown," the frog replied. "But if you will love me and let me be your companion and playmate, and let me sit beside you at the table, eat from your little golden plate, drink out of your little cup, and sleep in your little bed. If you promise me all that, I'll dive down and retrieve your golden ball." "Oh, yes," she said. "I'll promise you anything you want if only you'll bring back the ball." However, she thought, what nonsense that stupid frog talks. He just sits in the water croaking with the rest of the frogs. How can he expect a human being to accept him as a companion? Once the frog had her promise, he dipped his head under the water, dived down, and soon came paddling back to the surface with the ball in his mouth. When he threw it onto the grass, the princess was so delighted to see her beautiful plaything again that she picked it up and ran off. "Wait, wait," cried the frog. "Take me with you. I can't run like you." He croaked as loudly as he could, but what good did it do? She paid no attention to him. Instead, she rushed home and soon forgot all about the poor frog, who had to climb back down into his well. The next day, as she sat at the table with the king and his courtesans and ate from her little golden plate, something came crawling, splish splash, up the marble steps. When it reached the top, it knocked at the door and cried out, "Princess, youngest daughter, open up." She ran to see who was outside, but when she opened the door and saw the frog, she quickly slammed the door shut and went back to the table in a state of fright. The king could clearly see her heart was thumping and said, "My child, what are you afraid of? Has a giant come to get you?" God, these people are so racist. The giant didn't do anything. He's already blaming the... Anyway, it's always a giant. Anyway, has a giant come to get you? "Oh, no," she answered. "It's not a giant, but a nasty frog." "What does a frog want from you?" No one's like, "Why the fuck do you think a frog..." What does a frog want from you? "Oh, dear father, yesterday when I was sitting and playing near the well in the forest, my golden ball fell into the water, and because I cried so much, the frog fetched it for me. And because he insisted, I had to promise he could be my companion, but I never thought he'd get out of the water. Now he's outside and wants to come in and be with me." Just then there was a second knock at the door, and a voice cried out, "Princess, princess, youngest daughter, open up and let me in. Have you forgotten what you promised? Down by the well's cool water. Princess, princess, youngest daughter, open up and let me in." Then the king said, "If you made a promise, you must keep it. Go and let him in." After she went and opened the door, the frog hopped up into the room and followed her right to her chair, where he plopped himself down and cried out, "Lift me up beside you." She refused until the king finally ordered her to do so. And once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to climb onto the table. When he made it to the table, he said, "Now push your little gold plate nearer to me so we can eat together." There's a nice little illustration here of them at the table together. Some nice illustrations in this book, I gotta say. To be sure, she did this, but it was quite clear that she did not like it. The frog enjoyed his meal, while each bite, you can see on her face there that she does not like it in the illustration. She's very upset. And she didn't. The frog enjoyed his meal, while each bite the princess took got stuck in her throat. Finally he said, "I've had enough, and now I'm tired. Carry me upstairs to your room, and get your silken bed ready, so we can go to sleep." The princess began to cry because the cold frog frightened her. She did not even have enough courage to touch him, and yet now she was supposed to let him sleep in her beautiful clean bed. But the king gave her an angry look and said, "It's not proper to scorn someone who helped you when you were in trouble." So the king's fine with the frog getting into bed with her, the talking frog. Don't back out on your word. So she picks up the frog with 2 fingers. I guess they mean like this. She picks up the frog with her 2 fingers, carries him upstairs, and sets him down in a corner. Soon after she got into bed, he came crawling over to her and said, "I'm tired of wanting to sleep as much as you do. Lift me up, or I'll tell your father." This made the princess extremely angry, and after she picked him up, she threw him against the wall with all her might. Now you can have your rest, you nasty frog." However, when he fell to the ground, he was no longer a frog, but a prince with kind and beautiful eyes. So, in keeping with her father's wishes, she accepted him as her dear companion and husband. Whereupon the prince told her that a wicked witch had cast a spell over him, and no one could have got him out of the well except her. And now he intended to take her to his kingdom the next day. So it wasn't a kiss that saved her. It wasn't love that saved the prince. It was the attempted murder of the frog that saved the prince from the terrible spell, apparently. Then they fell asleep, and in the morning, when the sun woke them, and not to mention the fact that as soon as she saw he was attractive, she was, bam, in bed with him, and husband. It wasn't even just spending the night with husband. She was on that. Then they fell asleep, and in the morning, when the sun woke them, a coach drawn by 8 white horses came driving up. The horses had ostrich plumes on their heads and harnesses with golden chains. At the back, which is very practical, at the back of the coach stood faithful Heinrich. We're supposed to know who Heinrich is, apparently. Faithful Heinrich, the young king's servant. He had been so distressed when he had learned his master had been turned into a frog that he had ordered 3 iron bands be wrapped around his heart to keep it from bursting from grief and sadness. But now the coach had come to bring the young king back to his kingdom, and faithful Heinrich helped the prince and princess into it, and then took his place at the back again. He was overcome by joy because his master had been saved. I don't think that needs commentary, does it? When they had traveled some distance, the prince heard a crackling noise behind him, as if something had broken. He turned around and cried out, "Heinrich, the coach is breaking." "No, my lord, it's really nothing but the band around my heart, for it's nearly fell apart when the witch did cast her spell and made you live as a frog in the well." The crackling noise was heard 2 more times along the way, and the prince thought each time the coach was breaking, but the noise was only the sounds of the band snapping from faithful Heinrich's heart, for he knew his master was safe and happy. And that's the end of the story. That's the end. That's how it ends, the Frog King. That's the entirety of the story. It seems like there's a lot of plot holes and unfinished business at the end that you wouldn't see in a modern story. But you got to remember, much as cave drawings eventually led to Picasso, and there were many, many stages in between, storytelling has a similar evolution. And these stories, as two-dimensional as they may seem, are the foundation upon which we eventually get to the pulp fictions and the War and Peace and things like that can't exist without first having these more two-dimensional tales with the thinner plots and the thinner characters. And so that story that you know, where she ends up kissing the frog as a favor to him in repayment for his kindness, and that turns him into a prince, and then because they already know each other, there's a romantic relationship built upon the physical attraction that now exists afterwards. This is a thing that was added later as people began to realize that less developed tale was somewhat problematic. Not the racism aspect of it doesn't get cleaned up until much later. But I mean, they were really brutal about the whole nasty frog and the giants, and the fact that Heinrich is happy because he gets to be a servant to his master again. It was just is also rather telling about the culture of the time that this was written in, and the people, the author of it. Like if this story had been authored by someone in Heinrich's position on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure that that's not the way it would have been framed, right? So there's a lot of sociology and psychology of the time, as well as the development of the art history, can be seen just by looking at the way things are framed and the way things are developed. But mostly I hope you were just entertained by this tale, and more will come. This is just the first, so I am also, just like this story led to more developed and more complicated tales, hopefully my efforts in this, as I do more, will become more polished, and you will stick around to see that happen. Anyway, this is the first of many as I get through all the tales in this book. And then who knows, maybe we'll go on to Aesop's Fables after that, or something else. We'll see. I'm JD Adler. This is episode 1 of Old Saul.